Hello, my friendly strangers. It is Tuesday, and I have brought you another true scary story. This one is story number 4. I heard this story from my aunt at one of those reunion, funeral, wedding occasions when rare family members make an appearance. And we had been discussing how, with me in high school, and her having successfully survived it, if she had encountered the same awkwardness. So here it is, the best I can remember the way she told it. In her words, it was a mess. You have to understand, it was drilled into my head from early days that I had to work hard, be the best, put my grades and stuff ahead of anything, because I could do anything I wanted if I just worked hard enough. And it wasn't that I wasn't so good at school. It just took me longer to focus. It was great for my GPA, but all the time you're supposed to be slipping notes in class or spending lunch talking to people. I was studying or practicing. It became kind of a self-licking ice cream cone. I wasn't approaching people, so they didn't approach me. I think they thought I was snooty. I wasn't. I just wasn't the quickest at learning. But kids took it personally, and they'd be snooty to me, which was awful. And why would I then put aside sports or school to be worse at the things I had to be good at, to try to curry favor with people who were actively making me feel bad? It was a vicious cycle. There was this one time, context, I'd been going to school with the same people near my whole life, so over time, some of the kids knew I wasn't arrogant, just focused on studies and swimming. But others, they were so consistently standoffish or passive-aggressive. They'd say things in earshot of me, like darker-skinned girls just look so unnatural with that ice-blonde hair trend. And here I am, one of those darker-skinned girls, like, gee, I wonder who they're talking about. Well, spring formal was right around the corner, and you bet I rocked up with a platinum, stick-straight wig and pale blue dress. The best part was, the next day, when I went back to school, all the girls were asking how I'd gotten my hair to grow so long so fast. I guess they didn't think about wigs. It was things like that. A year or so later, it was girls just aren't good at math. So I went out for mathletes. It set the whole pace for my career, because the whole forensic accounting thing that I do now wasn't a job a lot of people talked about having back then. So yeah, I worked hard to have what I have, but something that I seemed to just get was swimming. And I was good, and my winning things made the team happy with me, for the most part. Of course, there were some that weren't so pleased. There was a girl I'd known since 2nd grade. Her name was Christina. We'd been cool before, but swimming had always been her thing, her whole identity. And she was all set to be the best swimmer at high school as she'd been in grade school. After a few races where I did well, she started acting cold. At this point, I thought, go off, I guess, because it wasn't about her, it was about me. It was about those kids in class who said things just loud enough for me to hear them. I had to shut them up. I hear about anxiety in kids these days, and it's like that, except all the little voices telling me, no, you can't, weren't in my head. They were people out in the world curling their lips and cutting their eyes at me. The only way to make them shut up was to show them that yes, I could. I got tunnel vision. I guess that's why I didn't notice the man watching me at first. You're face down in the water about 70% of the time when you're swimming. You're focused on not bashing your head into the poolside. And I was a kid. The adults were the ones who should have been on the lookout for things like that. But this was before the whole stranger danger thing. If it was me in the adult's position, I'd assume a man watching a bunch of kids swimming was a parent. He didn't stand out, not as far as looks went. He was your bog-standard generic man in his 30s, with medium-length hair, white dress shirt, and gray slacks. He wasn't out of place in Council Bluffs. He looked just like any other random dad, maybe taking a lunch break from the office to watch one of his kids at practice. It wasn't until the practice was over for the day and he walked right in front of me that I stopped and looked at him. He had dull hazel eyes. They were more tan than green. They stayed perfectly unwrinkled even when he smiled. That was weird, but I was already smiling back out of habit. It was what you do with adults. They smile, you smile. They wave, you respond. It's like some weird game of Simon Wants that you've never agreed to play, but were somehow always expected to. And he asked me something vague and obvious, like it looked like I went all out there. And I said sure, because what else was there to say to that? He looked pleased, told me to keep it up, that he saw I had a lot of drive, then asked if I could point out our coach. I wanted to respond that he would be the one with the windbreaker that said coach on the back, but I thought about it and pointed out Coach Jeffries. The man thanked me and walked on over. I figured it was odd, but at least it was over. But it wasn't over. The next day, our coach huddled us up and introduced who else? The same generic 30s man. He was a local photographer and owned his own photo studio, but had been branching out into action shots for sports magazines and, with my coach's emphasis, college scouts. Our coach stepped aside, chest swelled as the man, Mr. Dell, spoke on surprise at our age, given the speed and ability he'd seen. He was effusive in explaining how he could see future Olympians and full-ride scholarships in our pool. That's how Mr. Dell got his approval to start showing up at all of our practices and meets with this big camera. The lens seemed like it was a foot long, and it was just on us all the time. It was a bit to get used to, but all the parents were just as thrilled, and our school newspaper started printing these great photos. It all seemed legit. At practices, Mr. Dell always seemed to be around whenever I got out of the pool. He was just as full of compliments as he had been for the whole team, but it hit differently as he'd talk about things I was specifically doing. How I had perfected my turns, how I had made my butterfly stroke look smoother than some of the girls' breaststrokes, and how much talent I had. At first it felt good to have an external voice saying I was doing great, instead of kicking dirt on what I wanted to do. I'd smile, say thanks, and tried to compliment his photographs back. It was corny and probably sounded immature, but that's what you do. Somebody compliments you, you compliment them. And if I can be honest, the things he was saying, the compliments, they were nice to hear. And I'd start looking more for him, and he'd somehow always appear right wherever I looked when I'd glance up at the bleachers or look poolside. It was harmless. Until one day, when he showed up and, after practice, motioned me away from the others to give me a new towel. Just a towel. Nothing weird for a swimmer, right? Getting a gift, especially on the sly like that, though, it made me feel a bit weird. Adults don't just buy things for random kids for no reason. But then again, Mr. Dell had been nothing but nice to me. If there was an angle, I couldn't figure it out. Plus, it was a new towel, a thick plush one. I decided to smile and say thanks, and again he gave me that wide grin where his eyes didn't move at all, and I figured I'd played that about right. As the weeks went on, he kept just being off to the side whenever I'd head out to the locker room or when practice was over. He'd say nice things to all the girls who passed, but he always had something specific to tell me about. He would motion me over to wait so he could tell me once the other girls had passed by. The compliments got strange. Instead of cheering my form or giving me tips, pointing my toes, cupping my hands instead of splaying my fingers, he pointed out my body. He said, "No wonder you power past all those girls with those long legs. Amazing the strength and speed you have with such delicate arms." As he said that one, he traced his fingertips down my upper arm to the elbow. Even just thinking about it, I can feel it now. The following week, there was an amazing picture of me in the school newspaper. He'd gotten me just coming out of the water, and instead of my mouth open, gaping like a fish, I actually looked pretty okay. The thing was, this was one of the races where I came in second, and Christina, remember her? She came in first. Her mom even went to the coach and the school over it, asking why her daughter didn't warrant a front-page picture with the race win. She was accusing Mr. Dell of playing favorites. Nothing seemed to come of it. From what we heard, it just happened that of the pictures Mr. Dell sent in, the one of me was objectively the best picture, and the pictures of Christina were of the gaping fish face type. The newspaper thought she'd feel embarrassed with a big picture of her face looking unattractive on the front page. Thus, they spared her by using my picture instead. I was frankly just as surprised as she'd been, but decided she was just overreacting. This was more of that weird one-way competition she seemed to have with me. At least, that's what I thought, until after swim practice that day, when Mr. Bell, per usual, motioned me over. I was savvy enough to not draw attention by hanging back, instead dawdling, pretending to be digging into my swim tote while all the other girls passed by, before walking over to where Mr. Dell waited. He told me that I couldn't blame Christina for being angry, as though we were continuing a conversation we weren't having. He told me Christina was a good swimmer, but she was nowhere near as pretty as me. I know that that's a red flag now. He was twice my age, and the way he said it wasn't like how a grandpa or a dad would say it. It made me feel cold in my stomach. Suddenly, that thick towel didn't seem big enough. I managed to fake a smile and say thanks, and not let how I felt show up on my face. These are the adult rules again, you know. Adults get mad when you don't say thank you for everything, even stuff you didn't want. And I didn't want his words. The breathy way he said it, like a deep whisper, felt like a slug had been dropped onto my skin, sliming on me. But what could I do? I was mad at being in this situation. Mr. Dell had been nice, but now he was making me feel bad about being nice. Christina was already pissed at me, and her mom was too. Even the coach had seemed a little distant that day. If I made any fuss, all I'd do is prove a rude girl right somehow. As much as I felt bad about Mr. Dell, I didn't want Christina to win by making me push away one of the only adults who was nice to me. And that's why, when he offered to take more pictures of just me in his studio, I think that anger that I had towards Christina, towards her mother, towards the situation that I would now had to be in, it made me say yes. Mr. Dell was delighted, told me where his studio was. He had a shop in the mall, but it was the bad mall. That wasn't its name, obviously, but it suffered from comparison the way any town with two of the same thing, drugstore, fast food, or shopping plaza, suffers. We had the good mall, which was newer, cleaner, had better lighting, was more convenient to get to and thus busier and more alive. And then the bad mall, older, dingy under unhealthy yellow lights, abandoned for the flashy new, and moldering in a sulk, its few patrons ambling like tumbleweeds. I started to tell him I thought I could get my mom to bring me, but he insisted that our photo shoot be our little secret. He bolstered this by saying that if there were already accusations of him playing favorites, imagine if they knew I was getting a professional photo shoot and they weren't. Right away, I knew this was a bad idea. The bad mall was farther away from home, well outside of my ability to walk or bike. I tried a weak excuse of not knowing how to get all the way across town without my mother's help, but Mr. Dell had an answer, that I could just tell my mom I wanted to meet some friends at the nearby movie theater, only a block away from the bad mall. He said it like, sure, my mom would want me to see a movie on the weekends with my friends. And yeah, he was right, but I was suddenly very sure I didn't want to go. But what could I do? He's linked to colleges. He sings my praise. He took great pictures of me and cared about me. Surely if I declined, he'd be upset. And he was the adult. And if I said no, it wasn't like I could avoid him. He was at every practice, every meet. I had to go along with it, I thought. I mean, adults, they're always right, right? He was certainly right about my mom. She was delighted that I had made plans with friends. She leapt at the chance to drop me off at the theater. I made like I saw my friends inside, one of the groups of kids, and I stood off to the side until I saw her leave. Then I walked back out and over to the bad mall, all according to plan. Mr. Dell was waiting outside the entrance. He saw me coming. The first thing he wanted to do, though, was sit in one of those photo booths, the ones that spit out a strip of 4 pictures. But I didn't want to be that close to him. Those booths are small, and my thighs even then were built. But he insisted, with this fake pout about how he's a photographer, always taking the pictures, never in them. He motioned me in, wedged himself in next to me, and ordered me to smile. I did, but I didn't feel my eyes crinkle at all either. But that's not the worst part. On the 3rd flash, he dropped his arm around my shoulders and hauled me close, up against him. And on the 4th, he used his hand to turn my face, pushing his in front of mine, to try and kiss me. I shrunk back just in time for him to only get my nose, but I decided then and there that I was done. No way was I letting this man take me into his studio, where he'd have all the room in the world to do whatever. But he seemed pleased, happy, like smug happy, and got up to collect the photo strip like nothing had happened. I came out and started telling him I was done, and I was going to go home. I didn't want him to try kissing me like that again. I expected his face to get worried when I said that out loud. But he wasn't worried at all. He waved the strip of pictures in my face. The angle he'd chosen made it look like we were kissing. The back of his head covered my open eyes and grimacing face. He told me no one would believe I didn't go along with it willingly. I didn't know what to do. And that's when he made his biggest mistake. He became one of those voices, the voices that told me that simple little phrase that made me snap. He told me that there was nothing I could do about it and finished it with, "You just can't." Just hearing him say that, the friendly adult who'd been on my side about everything reduced to saying exactly the thing that everyone else did. It made him just one of those people I was going to prove wrong. It was like cold water splashed on my face. I thought about running, maybe just screaming. Neither of those seemed like good, winning options. If I ran, he'd just let me. He knew where he could find me. If I screamed, he could play rational adult to my screaming kid and talk his way out of whatever by pointing out how strange I was acting. He still had the strip of photos, and I still had lying to my mother. He was no good. I had to get away from him and get my side of the story out first. The first impression is the lasting one, before he could. And that's when I saw the signage over his shoulder for the food court. I figured it was good enough for a stall anyway. I told him I really didn't want to leave, I was just hungry, and he was pleased. I guess he thought this was the fight leaving me, and a couple of bucks and wings or a soda or whatever were cheap entry fare. He got all courteous, asking me what I wanted and promising to get it for me right away. They had one of those smoothie places, the ones that sold an orange-flavored drink, at the farthest corner. I picked that for sheer walking time alone. He said okay, and we walked over there. The whole time I was just scheming, trying to figure out a way to get away from him and someone of authority to tell what all had been happening without the bluster he'd used to sway my coach and all the parents of the kids on our swim team. He was being super solicitous. He had his hand on the small of my back. He guided me over to the smoothie place. I was plodding away on what to do when the answer walked right in front of me. Christina from swim, grabbing some napkins. She didn't see me, but my eyes were glued on her as she walked back to her table, where who should be sitting waiting on her return to begin her kung pao chicken but her mom, the one parent who had seen through all of Mr. Dell's BS, and she was there. I stood by while Mr. Dell bought our drinks. I smiled all cheesy with a big thank you when he handed it over, and before he could stop me, I bolted across the food court and came up right behind Christina, pulled the cap off, and tossed the drink at the back of her head. And her mom went postal. She had my upper arm in her grip and she was calling out for security. I turned and saw Mr. Dell coming up. Idiot thought he was going to smooth this over. He didn't even know who Christina's mom was. And just as he reached us, along came security. Mr. Dell was trying to talk with the security guys, sort of that, hey now, we're all adults here kind of thing. Christina was screeching like a cat. Her mom was hauling us both up when it clicked for her who the adult who came running up after me was. Her eyes did this surprised blink, then narrowed at him before staring hard at me. In that moment, I just let my face say the things I'd been holding back. I was just thinking, help. Please see I don't want this. Please keep insisting we go with mall security. I don't know if she caught it or thought it was crocodile tears trying to get out of trouble, but she was having none of what Mr. Dell was trying to sell. She was in this guard's face, insisting we go to the office right now and sort this all out. The guard looked concerned, and as another one joined us, I started to hope that there was a chance for me to get away from this man, get what he was doing out of the dim dark and into the light before it could get worse. At security, they separated us. I ended up in what was 100% an old broom closet with 2 chairs in it. The guard in there, an older guy, started asking me what had happened, and it came spilling out. I just told them I didn't want to be there. He tricked me. He was taking photos of me, and he had bad photos. I meant the one that looked like we were kissing, but looking back, I bet the old man thought something else. He got real stern-faced, but not at me. He was boring holes in the little window behind us with his eyes. The cops got called. They insisted on calling my parents and speaking to them, but they spent most of their time back with Mr. Dell. I was sat outside while someone called my mom. They had these hard yellow chairs, the same yellow as our school swimsuits. I was just staring at them while I sat there, not knowing what was going to happen. I'd gotten my story out, but was Mr. Dell going to be able to smooth it all over? Was I thinking I was safe, only to turn around at the next swim meet and see him up in the bleachers, watching me? After a bit, Christina and her mom came out. They both looked pale. I mean, paler than usual. Christina's mom's eyes were just flicking around the room. Christina looked right at me, and right then, all I could think to do, seeing someone else's face showing the nasty cold fear I'd been feeling by myself, all I could do was look back at her and mouth, "Thank you." The rest came out in bits and pieces, but summarizing, those college prospects Mr. Dell said he had, there weren't any. He'd been lying about that, same way he'd been twisting things around to make what he was doing to me right in his head. He was so used to being glib and lying his way past folks, he must have said something the cops didn't like. It set them off that this guy was straight bluffing. They ended up taking him in, searching his studio. They found more pictures, a ton of pictures. Some of them were from swim practice, shots of us outside the pool. They were all zoomed in on pieces of us. Some of them, though, were shots from his studio, mostly a girl from a different school. They were bad. Mr. Dell went to prison. The community reeled, and there were a couple of news articles, but never got much outside of the Tri-County area. Christina and I actually became pretty okay friends, though I think her mom still hates me to this day. But I don't care. I'm just so stupidly grateful that they were there. And, in a weird way, stupidly grateful that Mr. Dell said the one thing to snap me out of it. Tell me I can't do something, I'll make you eat those words. Be kind to each other out there. Look out for one another. And look out for yourselves. Like, comment, subscribe, or don't. The choice is yours. I'm just really glad you came by. Until next time, take care, strangers.